She called it a joke, but I heard it over the sound of everyone chewing. I wore my favorite outfit to the dinner: black jeans, a vintage white blouse, and my red thrifted bag. I knew it wasn't on brand for the Lane family, but it made me feel like myself. Still, the moment I stepped into the dining room, I felt the judgment hang in the air like steam from the roast. My mother's eyes scanned me like a scanner at airport security. She smiled, that tight, performative curve of her lips, and said, "Oh, Sophie, still shopping at the church basement." Everyone chuckled, even my dad, even Dylan. I just nodded and took my seat. Heart racing. I could have said something I wanted to, but if you've grown up around women like Lillian Lane, you learn early that silence is safer than sincerity, so I laughed, a small, robotic sound that didn't even reach my chest. The clink of silverware resumed like nothing happened. But something had. That comment, it wasn't about the bag or the blouse. It was about hierarchy. Her need to remind everyone that I was still beneath them, even at the family table. Grandma Margaret was there too, quiet at the head of the table, swirling wine in her glass. She didn't laugh. She just watched me, sharp, still, unreadable. I looked away before I could cry. I didn't cry. I just counted how many bites I had left until I could leave. Every dinner with my family felt like a game of emotional landmines. You smile, you nod, you dodge, and maybe, if you're lucky, they don't notice how tightly you're holding yourself together. Lillian kept going, as she always does, lacing sarcasm into every sentence like it was seasoning. "We should take Sophie shopping sometime, get her something age-appropriate, maybe even new." More laughter, more wine. No one stopped her. Even Dylan, who once let me crash on his couch for 2 weeks after a breakup, joined in. "Might be a good investment. She's got that interview at the clinic, right? First impressions count." I didn't know what burned more, his words or the smug tone he used to say them. I sat there, cheeks burning, fingers gripping my red bag under the table. It was old, scratched, faded, but it was mine. Bought with my money, my choice, my freedom, in the shape of a handle and a brass clasp. I wasn't going to explain that Grandma Margaret had given me $2,000 over the past year to help with school and groceries. That she had slipped me envelopes and whispered, "Don't tell your mother, she'll make it ugly," because she would have, she always did. They mocked my clothes, but I was the only one not wearing a mask. Grandma finally spoke after the plates were cleared. She looked directly at my mom and asked, casually but loud enough for everyone to hear, "Did Sophie ever tell you what I gave her for Christmas last year?" My mom blinked. "A book, wasn't it?" "No," Grandma said. "I sent her $2,000 in 3 envelopes, for school, for groceries, for freedom." You could have heard a pin drop between the wine glasses. My mom's face paled. Dylan looked like someone had slapped him. My dad tried to sip water and almost choked, and I just stared at my plate, still holding the red bag in my lap like it was a life raft. Grandma leaned back, took another sip, and added, "You can't expect someone to bloom if you keep stepping on her roots." That was the night the table shifted, not in furniture, in power. Growing up, I always knew there were rules in our house, unspoken, rigid, and written in my mother's tone. You didn't argue, you didn't outshine. And you definitely didn't dress beneath the Lane standard, whatever that meant. Appearances were everything, and my mother made sure we knew who we were performing for. Lillian wasn't the type to scream. She didn't need to. Her words were scalpels, precise, bloodless, and always disguised as concern. "You look tired, dear," meant I looked ugly. "Maybe try something different with your hair," meant I wasn't presentable. And if I dared to push back, she'd sigh and say, "You're just too sensitive." My dad, Greg, wasn't cruel, just absent. Even when he was physically there, he worked long hours and spent the rest of his time trying not to upset Lillian. He laughed at her jokes, even when they were at my expense, and changed the subject when I tried to defend myself. It was easier to let her win. Then there was Dylan, 2 years older. Law school graduate, golf club member, and family favorite. He didn't even need to try. He existed in a spotlight that never dimmed. When I got in it was great. When he did, it was framed. When I came home late, it was irresponsibility. When he did, it was independence. I think my mother saw me as a failed version of herself. She used to be in fashion. Back in her 20s, ran some boutique before she married Dad. She gave it up when Dylan was born, and she never let us forget it. Every critique came wrapped in bitterness, like I was a reminder of what she lost. She didn't want a daughter. She wanted a mirror that obeyed. Even as a kid, I learned to disappear. I draw in corners, write stories, build entire worlds in silence. I remember once, I wrote a poem that won a school contest. My mom read it, then told me not to share it with the family. It's a little too personal, she said, folding the paper like it was something shameful. Grandma Margaret was the only one who saw me. She never praised me like I was some golden child, she just listened. I'd visit her house after school, sit in her kitchen drinking ginger tea, and talk about anything. She'd nod, laugh at my jokes, and say things like, "You've got a mind like a river, deep and quiet." She never told me what to wear. She never asked why I didn't wear makeup, she just let me be. That freedom was so rare, I didn't know how to name it until much later. I only knew that with her, I breathed easier. When I started college, money got tight, my parents offered help. But it came with strings, constant check-ins, comments about how I was spending, so I stopped asking. That's when Grandma started sending money quietly. Envelopes and birthday cards, direct transfers labeled groceries. I didn't tell anyone, especially not my mom. I knew it would be twisted, used, mocked, Grandma said. Consider it repayment for every time you had to bite your tongue in that house, and I did. She gave me cash, but what she really gave me was permission to exist. I bought my first pair of second-hand boots with that money, then textbooks, then the red bag. Every time I carried it, I felt a little closer to something real, something that belonged to me, not to their expectations. My mom noticed it right away. Of course she did. Looks vintage, she said the first time. Is that code for worn out? I smiled and said yes, but inside, I knew she felt threatened. That bag wasn't ugly, it was untamed. The more I dressed like myself, the more she tried to chip away at me at family events. She'd whisper, "Don't you want to look a bit more polished?" Or, "That skirt doesn't really flatter your figure." Every word was designed to fold me back into the mold she approved of, but the mold didn't fit anymore. I wasn't 12, I wasn't afraid of being different. I was afraid of losing myself trying to make her comfortable, and yet, every time I walked into that house, I still hesitated. I still wondered if this would be the dinner where she'd finally say, "You look nice," but she never did, because approval, in her world, was a weapon, not a gift. It's easy to miss red flags when they're embroidered into your daily life. My mother didn't scream or hit. She performed. She made cruelty look like tradition and shame feel like etiquette. And for years, I mistook her power plays for parenting. There was the time I wore a dress I loved to Dylan's graduation party, pale blue, soft fabric, loose fit. I'd saved for it. The moment I stepped out of the car, she said, "You're really into that frumpy look, huh?" Everyone laughed. I adjusted the hem and smiled, but my chest burned. She mocked in public but advised in private, said things like, "I only say these things so you don't embarrass yourself," or, "Someday you'll thank me for being honest," as if her words were pearls and I was too ungrateful to wear them. At family holidays, she'd serve Dylan's plate first, always, and if I brought a dish, she'd announce, "Sophie made this, it's vegan. But let's be polite and try it." It didn't matter that everyone liked it. She needed me to know I was an outsider in her curated world. My dad, like clockwork, stayed neutral. "She doesn't mean it like that. Just ignore her. It's easier not to engage." His passivity hurt more than her words. At least she saw me enough to critique. He just disappeared behind a newspaper or into the kitchen. Her insults weren't loud, they were elegant. That's what made them dangerous. I once got a tattoo small, behind my ear, a minimalist line drawing of a flower. When she saw it, she sighed and said, "Well, there goes any chance at a real career." She wasn't joking. I laughed, pretending I was in on it. My friends used to ask why I still went to family dinners. I didn't know how to explain that. Walking away from your mother, even a cruel one, feels like amputating something invisible. You keep hoping maybe this time she'll smile without a barb beneath it. There were moments when she'd almost reach softness. She'd ask about my work or compliment my hair, but it never lasted. It always curved back into sarcasm, like she couldn't allow me to feel too seen, too confident. When I turned 25, she gave me a makeover gift card. I thought it was sweet until she added, "It'll be good for you. You've let yourself go a bit." I never used it, but I kept the card as a reminder. Dylan's girlfriend, Emma, once pulled me aside and said, "Your mom is intense." That was the nicest way someone had ever acknowledged it. I nodded. "You get used to it." But I hadn't. I had just built stronger armor. Every compliment had a hook. Every smile had a shadow. She never once asked how I was doing in school, but she kept tabs on how I looked in photos. Once texted me after I posted a picture, "Are you gaining weight or is that just the camera?" I stared at the message until the words blurred. The red bag became her favorite target. Still dragging that thing around, she'd ask, "At least pretend you're trying." I wanted to scream. This bag paid for my groceries when you didn't. But I didn't, because it wasn't safe to be proud in her presence. And yet, part of me still longed for her praise. I hated that even now I'd stand in front of the mirror before family dinners, wondering if this would be the outfit that made her pause, smile, and say, "You look beautiful." But that moment never came, and deep down I knew it never would, because if she really saw me, she'd lose the control she'd spent her whole life perfecting. The family dinner wasn't supposed to be a big event, just the usual Sunday thing: roast, wine, too much salt on the green beans, and too many eyes waiting for something to mock. I had almost skipped it, but Grandma said she'd be there, and I hadn't seen her in weeks. I wore what made me feel good: my thrifted blouse, black jeans, and the red bag slung over my shoulder like a shield. As soon as I walked in, my mom's eyes narrowed. That familiar scan, that internal checklist of everything she found off. I said hi. She looked me up and down and said, "I didn't realize we were dressing down tonight." My dad chuckled, already pouring wine. Dylan nodded without looking up from his phone. I stood in the doorway, suddenly 14 again, wishing I had turned around the moment I parked. We sat. The food came. Lillian poured wine like a queen serving her court. I reached for bread and she said, "Careful, honey, that top's already doing." "You know favors." Everyone laughed. Even Dylan muttered, "Mom, savage." But no one defended me. She insulted my clothes, but what she really meant was, "You're not welcome here." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I knew the game: laugh or look weak. I smiled. Bit into bread I didn't taste and told myself, "Just make it to dessert." But then she turned to Dylan's girlfriend and said, "Isn't it sweet how Sophie sticks to her aesthetic? I always say she's like an art project, messy, but she tries." Emma froze. She looked at me, then at Lillian, unsure whether to laugh or not. That's when Grandma spoke, calm, deliberate. "Did Sophie ever tell you what I gave her last Christmas?" My mom blinked. "A book," she guessed, voice suddenly unsure. Grandma shook her head. $2,000. For tuition, for bills, for food." The room went silent. My dad stopped mid-chew. Dylan glanced at me like he had seen me for the first time. My mother's face lost its smugness. Grandma continued, sipping her wine, voice cool and firm. "I trust her with my money more than I'd trust anyone at this table with my name." My heart thundered. I didn't know she was going to say it. I hadn't even told her what happened last week: how I skipped meals to make rent, how I'd cried in the back of the thrift store, counting quarters for detergent. But somehow she knew, and she chose now to say it. They laughed at my bag. She exposed the weight it had carried. My mom tried to recover. "Well, I didn't know she needed that kind of help." "Sophie never says anything." Grandma didn't blink. "Maybe because when she does, you twist it into a punchline." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my hands still gripping that red bag like it might disappear if I let go. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I stayed, and for the first time, I felt the room shift, not around me, but in my favor. The rest of dinner was awkward. My mom grew quiet. My dad kept trying to steer the conversation. Dylan cleared his throat a lot. No one made another joke about my clothes. I left early, saying I had work in the morning. Grandma kissed my forehead, held my hand a second longer than usual, and whispered, "About time they saw you carry more than fabric." When I walked to my car, the wind felt different, cold, but clean, and for once, I didn't cry in the driver's seat. The drive home felt endless, even though it was only 15 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel like I was bracing for something. But nothing came: no tears, no screams. Just that heavy silence that feels louder than a fight. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, line by line. The jokes, the laughter, the moment Grandma broke the script. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt cracked open, like someone had peeled off the skin I'd grown to survive and left me raw at the table. I got home, dropped my bag by the door, and sank to the floor. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to be vertical anymore. Sitting up felt like too much. I curled up in the corner, knees to chest, like I used to do in my bedroom when I was 15, and she said I'd never look the part. The bag lay beside me, red leather, worn at the edges, the clasp slightly bent. I reached for it and just held it. Not like a purse, like a piece of armor. Like a version of myself that had walked through rooms I never belonged in and came out still breathing. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. I skipped class, ignored texts. My body felt sore, like grief had weight, like every laugh I swallowed, every smile I forced was sitting on my chest now, demanding to be acknowledged. I checked my bank account. Low, rent was coming up, tuition was due. I hadn't told Grandma. I didn't want her to think I was asking for more, but deep down, I wanted someone to offer help without me having to collapse first. They drained me slowly until the silence felt like safety. I started missing shifts, not because I didn't want to work, but because I couldn't fake the energy. Couldn't put on that bright customer service smile while carrying the echo of my mother's voice in my head when I finally called Julia. My best friend, she said, you need to stop going to those dinners. But she didn't get it. None of my friends came from families like mine where love was conditional, shaped like a mirror, and offered only when you reflected what they wanted. I thought about skipping the next Sunday dinner, thought about sending a text saying I was sick, but I didn't, because even after everything, some small, stupid part of me still wanted to show up and be chosen that Sunday. I stood in front of the mirror holding a new blouse I bought on clearance. It was plain, beige. Safe, I thought, maybe this will keep her quiet. Then I saw the red bag on the chair and felt something snap. I put the blouse back, wore what I wanted. Dinner was quiet, tense. My mom barely spoke to me. My dad asked about work. Dylan was glued to his phone. Grandma smiled at me like she knew I had passed a test I hadn't studied for. I stopped dressing to be tolerated. That's when I became visible. After dessert, my mom said, Sophie, next time maybe tone it down a little. No smile, no sarcasm, just cold, measured criticism. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I said no. She blinked. Excuse me? I looked her in the eye and repeated, no. Then I stood, grabbed my red bag, and walked out. I didn't wait for dessert, didn't make excuses, didn't explain. I got home, locked the door, and sat on the floor again. But this time I wasn't hiding, I was rebuilding. It started with an email, one I almost deleted, thinking it was spam, but it was from a local nonprofit. Would you be interested in speaking on a panel about financial survival in college? Apparently, someone had recommended me. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I replied yes, not because I felt brave, but because I was tired of hiding. I didn't share the details, just said I had learned how to make ends meet with creativity and dignity. I wore the red bag to the panel, sat between two other women with similar stories. For the first time, my pain had a purpose. People came up afterward. One girl, maybe 19, said, "You reminded me of myself. I thought I was the only one." I gave her the name of the thrift store I loved, told her which scholarships to look at. She smiled like I had handed her a lifeline. Maybe I had. That moment was small, but it shifted something. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was becoming someone I would have looked up to at 19. Someone who didn't shrink at a dinner table. Someone who didn't mistake cruelty for concern. At home, I pulled out a stack of old notes and receipts I'd kept in the red bag. Tiny, ordinary reminders of the life I had built: grocery lists, secondhand finds, scholarship letters, grandma's handwritten bank transfers, each one a piece of a quiet rebellion. I started documenting them, organizing the papers, taking photos, writing short reflections, not for anyone else, just for me, a private archive of becoming. I called it proof of living. I kept the receipts not of what I bought, but of who I became. I shared one photo online, paired with a quote from Grandma, "Freedom is a full fridge and no one asking how you paid for it." The post exploded, dozens of messages. Women telling me they understood, that they'd lived that kind of silence too. Even Julia cried when she saw it. She said, "You've been carrying a story this whole time and I never knew." I told her, because I didn't know I was allowed to tell it. Grandma came by the next week, no warning. Just knocked and let herself in with that old spare key I never returned. She brought cake, sat on my couch, looked around my tiny apartment and said, "This place feels like you." That was the highest praise I'd ever received. I showed her the project. She went quiet, then she said, "Your mother has style, but you have soul." And in that moment, I knew she had seen every version of me I had been too afraid to show anyone else. She pulled an envelope from her purse, another $500. I shook my head. "Grandma, I'm okay now." She smiled. "I know, but this one's not for survival, it's for something that makes you feel alive. She stopped rescuing me, she started investing in my future. I used the money to print a zine, a small booklet of my photos, captions, and reflections. I left a few at the coffee shop I worked at, two were gone within a day. I wasn't famous, I wasn't viral, but someone saw me, and that was enough. I kept wearing the red bag not because I had to, but because I chose to. It was no longer just survival gear, it was a trophy, not of victory, but of endurance. And little by little, the weight in my chest began to shift, not disappear, just redistribute. Like I was learning how to carry it differently, with less shame, with more power. The next family dinner came 2 weeks later. I wasn't planning to go, but then I thought maybe it was time, not to argue, not to explain, just to exist on my own terms. And let that speak louder than anything I could say. I wore exactly what I wanted, the same vintage blouse, the same black jeans, and of course the red bag, not polished, not trendy, not lane approved, just honest, just mine. As I walked in, my mother looked at me, then at the bag, then away. No comment, no jab, just silence, stiff and sour. My dad asked if I wanted wine. Dylan barely looked up, and Grandma, she smiled like she'd been waiting for this version of me to arrive. Dinner moved forward, small talk, weather, work updates. My mom mentioned Dylan's firm expansion. I nodded, chewed slowly, didn't interrupt. I didn't need to prove anything. Then Emma spoke. I saw your post online, your zine. The one with the red bag. She smiled. I loved it. I didn't know you did art. My fork paused midair. My mother's face froze. I swallowed. Thanks. It's about documenting survival and identity and silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at my mom. But she felt it, everyone did. She used to strip me of voice, now even silence echoed with mine. Grandma reached into her purse. I brought a few extra copies, she said, pulling out the zines like it was the most casual thing in the world. In case anyone wants to read something honest for a change. My mom stayed quiet. Dylan flipped through one without much interest. Emma took one eagerly. My dad glanced at the cover and said, "That's the red bag, isn't it?" I smiled. Yeah, it's carried more than they'll ever know. I didn't wait for praise. I didn't expect it. I just sat there, calm and touchable, because the real revenge was this. I was no longer asking for space. I was the space. After dinner, as I grabbed my things, my mom walked over. "Sophie," she said, soft, controlled. "Are you trying to humiliate me with that project?" I looked at her calm. "No, I'm just telling the truth." She didn't reply, just blinked once, then stepped back like the air between us had changed texture, and it had. Because the moment she realized I didn't need her approval anymore, she lost all her power. She built herself on my silence. Now I speak, and she trembles. In the car, I laughed for the first time in weeks, not out of cruelty, out of release. Because nothing is louder than living well in front of the people who bet on your failure. I drove home with the windows down, the bag in the passenger seat, sun catching its worn leather like a trophy under spotlight. I didn't need to burn bridges. I had built something better, an exit, paved with dignity. It's strange how quiet peace can feel after a lifetime of tension. No fireworks, no dramatic final speech, just space, air in the lungs, silence without fear. I woke up the morning after that dinner and didn't check my phone for messages. That might undo me. I made coffee slowly, barefoot, windows open. The city sounded distant but kind. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself against the world. There was nothing to defend. I had already survived. The red bag sat by the door. Still worn, still imperfect. I looked at it and smiled, not with nostalgia, but with reverence. That bag had walked me through judgment, rejection, and shame, and now it stood like a symbol of everything they couldn't take. A few days later, I was invited to speak at a women's resource center. They wanted someone to talk about emotional survival, how to build identity when family erodes it. I said yes. Not because I had healed completely, but because I knew how to speak through the cracks. I wore the red bag on stage, told them the story, not just of the dinner, but the years that led to it, the tiny wounds, the silent nights, the moments of almost giving up. Women in the front row cried. One stood up after and said, "You put words to what I've lived but never said." I carried shame like luggage. Now I carry a story, and it fits in one red bag. Grandma came to that talk, sat in the front row, arms crossed like a proud general. Afterward, She hugged me and whispered, "You didn't break the cycle, you redefined it." I went home that night and pulled out the envelope she once gave me, the one labeled for something that makes you feel alive. I hadn't spent it yet. I finally knew what it was for. I bought a used camera, started taking portraits of women like me, survivors of invisible families. I asked them to bring something symbolic. A pair of shoes, a diary, a hairbrush, a bag. Then I photographed them holding it like armor. I called the project Heirloom, not for what we inherited, but for what we saved ourselves from. Each photo told a story, each woman, a mirror of the silence I once lived inside. The red bag became part of the exhibit, not displayed in glass, not behind rope, just hanging on a hook beside the entrance, next to a placard that read, "Carried through survival, left at the door of freedom." My mother never came. I didn't invite her, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed her to see what she always refused to. They mocked what I wore. Now women wear my story like protection. One night, I walked past my parents' house. No one saw me. The lights were on, the same curtains, the same table, I imagined, with the same unspoken rules. But I wasn't outside it anymore, I was beyond it. I left nothing at their door, no letters, no confrontations, just footsteps fading into the night. I had nothing left to prove. I came home, hung the bag gently on my wall, and whispered, "Thank you for carrying me until I could carry myself." She mocked my clothes until Grandma asked about the $2 she sent me. Now the world asks me what I carry, and I answer myself.